Sea was stolen. It's full of historical inaccuracies, misleading rhetoric, and emotional manipulation. Today, we're joined by a respected historian from Professor Themba Khumalo, an expert in African liberation movements and post-colonial statehood. He has written extensively on independent struggles across Africa, including Eritrea's long and difficult path to freedom. Professor, thank you for joining us. Let's begin with the big claim of that video. Ethiopia's sea was stolen on April 27, 1993, the day Eritrea gained independence. From a historical perspective, is that true?
No, it is not true. To call Eritrea's independence the theft of Ethiopia's sea is historically dishonest. Eritrea was never simply Ethiopia's coastline. It was a distinct colony under Italy from the late 19th century, later occupied by Britain, and then federated with Ethiopia under UN resolution in 1952. When Ethiopia unilaterally annexed Eritrea in 1962, that act violated international agreements. So Eritrea's independence in 1993 was not theft. It was the restoration of sovereignty to a colonially defined entity. Ethiopia did not lose a coastline that was inherently its own. It lost control over territory it had forcefully absorbed.
Ethiopia's maritime destiny stretched back thousands of years. How accurate is that?
That's a rhetorical exaggeration. Yes, the ancient Aksumite kingdom, roughly 100 to 700 CE, controlled coastal ports like Adulis, which were critical for Red Sea trade. But Ethiopia's long imperial history after Aksum was overwhelmingly land-based. From the Middle Ages until modern times, Ethiopia often lacked direct control over the Red Sea coast, which was ruled by different powers: the Ottomans, the Egyptians, and later Italy. So the notion of an unbroken Ethiopian maritime destiny is a myth used for modern political arguments.
The video paints the 1993 referendum as if it was a betrayal, claiming Ethiopia's leaders just surrendered the coast. Was that referendum legitimate?
Absolutely legitimate. The Eritrean independence referendum was supervised by the United Nations and observed by international bodies. Over 99% of voters chose independence. This was an exercise in self-determination, one of the most fundamental principles of international law after World War II. No one snatched anything. The Eritrean people voted overwhelmingly for statehood after 30 years of armed struggle. Ethiopia's transitional government recognized that reality.
The video accuses Meles Zenawi of betrayal, saying he failed to demand even a corridor to the sea. Was that a failure?
We must understand the political moment. In 1991, Ethiopia had just overthrown the Derg, one of the most brutal regimes in Africa. The country was exhausted, fragmented, and in need of peace. Meles Zenawi understood two things. International law would not allow Ethiopia to hold Eritrea hostage over ports. And the priority was regional stability. Forcing access by annexing Assab or Massawa would have reignited war immediately. Yes, he might have underestimated Ethiopia's future reliance on Djibouti, but to call him a traitor is simplistic. His choice was pragmatic. Better a stable peace with Eritrea than endless war over ports.
The video dramatizes the idea that Ethiopia's ships, warehouses, and infrastructure were plundered overnight by Eritrea. Is that how it happened?
That is misleading. When Eritrea became independent, it inherited the infrastructure within its borders, just as every decolonized nation did. Ports, depots, ships stationed in Assab and Massawa, those became Eritrean property because they were on Eritrean territory. That's not plunder. That's how sovereignty works. When Algeria became independent, France didn't get to keep its Algerian ports. When Namibia became free, South Africa didn't claim Walvis Bay forever. Eritrea's case is no different.
The video also compares Ethiopia to Bolivia, saying no court will give Ethiopia its sea back. How does that comparison hold up?
It's actually a perfect example, but not in the way the video intends. Bolivia lost its Pacific coast to Chile in a war in the 19th century. That was conquest. Eritrea, however, was not taken from Ethiopia in a war. It voted for independence under international supervision. So if Bolivia cannot reclaim its coast after a war, Ethiopia certainly cannot claim Eritrea's coast, because Eritrea is an internationally recognized state with sovereignty. The ICJ would reject any claim outright.
The video insists Ethiopia's landlocked status is existential. Is being landlocked really that crippling in today's world?
Being landlocked presents challenges, but it is not existential. Many successful economies are landlocked: Switzerland, Austria, Botswana, Rwanda. International law, specifically the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS, guarantees landlocked nations access to ports through transit agreements. Ethiopia already has secure access through Djibouti. Yes, it pays fees, but that is normal international practice. What Ethiopia needs is not to reclaim the sea, but to build strong trade agreements, diversify its access points, and strengthen its infrastructure.
The rhetoric of the video often frames Eritrea's independence as Ethiopia's national wound. From an Eritrean perspective, how should we understand this framing?
This framing erases Eritrea's suffering. Eritrea endured 30 years of war, hundreds of thousands dead, villages burned, and systematic repression under Ethiopian rule. For Eritrea's independence was liberation, not theft. When Ethiopians call it a wound, it ignores Eritrea's right to self-determination. It turns Ethiopia into the victim of history, when in fact it was the oppressor in Eritrea for decades. That narrative is not only misleading, it is insulting to the memory of those who fought and died for Eritrean freedom.
Let's talk about the future. The video ends by urging Ethiopia to negotiate like a lion and reclaim access through force or leverage. Is that realistic?
That is dangerous rhetoric. If Ethiopia pursues ports through intimidation or war, it will destabilize the Horn of Africa further. The region is already fragile, with conflicts in Sudan, Somalia, and Tigray. Another war would devastate millions. The wiser path is cooperation. Ethiopia can work with Eritrea, Djibouti, and Somaliland on mutually beneficial trade. Eritrea has every right to charge for port use, just as Djibouti does. Ethiopia's size gives it bargaining power, but that power must be used diplomatically, not militarily.
Finally, Professor, what would you say to those who sincerely believe Ethiopia's sea was stolen?
I would say, study the history honestly. Eritrea was never simply Ethiopia's coastline. It was a distinct nation with a distinct colonial history whose people fought and voted for independence. Nothing was stolen. If Ethiopia wants prosperity, the answer is not to dwell on a mythical maritime past, but to embrace regional integration, invest in infrastructure, and respect the sovereignty of its neighbors. That is how Ethiopia will rise, not through nostalgia, but through cooperation.
Professor Khumalo, thank you for giving us such a clear and historically grounded perspective. Eritrea's independence was not theft, it was justice long delayed. At 189 Media, we believe history must be told truthfully, free from manipulation. If you found this discussion valuable, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Let's keep challenging false narratives with facts and insight. Until next time, stay sharp, stay informed, and stay committed to the truth.